Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines. Help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear our masks and we'll have to stay distant. We'll wash our hands and we'll be more resistant. Fauci.
All right, Crystal, what's on your radar?
Well, boys and girls, let me cut right to the chase here. Liberals' favorite billionaire hero, Bill Gates, is lying to you in a way that is profoundly harmful for lives in the global south and for your health right here in the U.S. Let me explain. So as you know, while the U.S. is doing pretty well on vaccine administration, with half of U.S. adults having received at least one dose, poor countries are in truly desperate shape. Somewhere around 3/4 of vaccine doses have been administered in just 10 high-income countries. Over 100 countries have yet to administer their very first dose. India, of course, has become the new ground zero for exploding COVID cases. The U.S. just recently lifted an embargo on the raw materials needed to help make COVID vaccines in that country and to improve their vaccination rates. But in general, it's a mess. And it's a mess for basically one simple reason: greed. Pharma wants to keep their profits high, and they have aggressively lobbied their home countries in the U.S. and in the EU to make sure that they can achieve that goal, protecting their patent monopolies so that generic versions of their life-saving vaccines cannot be manufactured, which would both increase supply and lower the cost. They have had an extraordinarily powerful ally in that fight to protect their bottom line, human lives be damned, our own supposed savior of global public health, Bill Gates. Now, Gates has been pushing a solution to poor nation vaccine distribution that conveniently protects pharma profits. That is the COVAX program through the World Health Organization, where rich countries donate to secure doses for middle-income and low-income nations. Sounds good maybe in theory, but in practice, it's been a joke. They set a goal of 2 billion doses, which would still, by the way, be insufficient to meet the need. But they have instead provided a pathetic 38 million doses. Has this dramatic underperformance led Bill Gates to rethink his approach? Because let's not kid ourselves, by dint of his money and his connection, he has essentially appointed himself the unofficial world czar of public health. The answer of whether he's rethought it is, of course, not a chance. In an interview on Sky News, Bill Gates was asked whether it would be helpful to lift vaccine patent protections in order to increase access. Here is his answer.
There's been some speculation that the changing intellectual property rules and allowing these vaccines, as you say, the recipe for these vaccines to be shared would be helpful. Do you think that would be helpful?
No.
Why not?
Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines. And so moving something that had never been done, moving a vaccine from, say, a J&J factory into a factory in India, that it's novel. It's only because of our grants and our expertise that can happen at all. The thing that's holding things back in this case is not intellectual property. There's not like some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. You've got to do the trials on these things, and every manufacturing process has to be looked at in a very careful way. There's all sorts of issues around intellectual property having to do with medicines, but not in terms of how quickly we've been able to ramp up the volume here. I remember how shocked people were when we said we were going to do second sources in these developing country factories. That was a novel thing, and we got all the rights from the vaccine companies. They didn't hold it back. They were participating. I do a regular phone call with the pharmaceutical CEOs to make sure that work is going at full speed.
So let's just unpack what he says there. His argument is that lifting patent protections will not help the supply problem whatsoever. So it's better to just stay the course and produce at the current level and hope that eventually rich countries donate enough money and surplus vaccines that poor countries get taken care of. In his words, it's not like there's some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. Oh, really? I present to you this article from the AP. In an industrial neighborhood on the outskirts of Bangladesh lies a factory with gleaming new equipment imported from Germany. Its immaculate hallways lined with hermetically sealed rooms. It's operating at just a quarter of its capacity. It is one of 3 factories that the AP found on 3 continents whose owners say they could start producing hundreds of millions of COVID-19 vaccines on short notice if only they had the blueprints and the technical know-how. I present also to you John Fulton, president of BioLease in Canada, who says he could be making millions of doses today if the know-how had been shared. We've been passed over. We've got this production capacity and it's not being put to use. If we had started this last year, we could have shipped millions of doses by now. This is supposed to be like a wartime effort, everyone in it together, but that does not seem to be the case. And finally, I present to you the words of Manuel Martin, a policy advisor to Doctors Without Borders. The Gates organization dampened early enthusiasm by saying that IP is not an access barrier in vaccines. That's just demonstratively false. Demonstratively false. Bill Gates is lying to you when he says that lifting patent protections will not help with access. Now look, it may not magically fix everything. Nothing is a cure-all, but it is a root cause of the problem, and it would help to ease the supply issue so that poor countries can start vaccinating, and we can all avoid the horror of watching the virus mutate to the point where it jumps the current vaccines. Bill Gates, with his billions, set the course for how global vaccine distribution would unfold, and now millions of people around the world are paying the price. Now, for those who've been tracking Gates' actions in the public health space for decades, these new comments will come as absolutely no surprise, as journalist Alexandra Zaitchik writes over at TNR. Since Gates got involved in the AIDS epidemic in Africa in the late 90s, he has cultivated close relationships with big pharma execs, lauded their wonderful and noble efforts, and aggressively pushed industry-friendly policies with regards to patents. This significantly set back access to AIDS antiretroviral therapies, and it has been a disaster for COVID vaccine access. Gates' pro-industry stance also should come as no surprise, given that the man is a billionaire Uber capitalist who made his own ill-gotten fortune by novel exploitations of patent law and unchecked monopoly power. Now, he may sincerely want to cure disease and make the world a better place. He also has a sincere ideological commitment to protecting monopolies and profit margins for some of the world's worst actors, and that he doesn't seem to care what the consequences are. He and pharma argue that patents help foster innovation, which creates the life-saving drugs that we all benefit from. This, too, is largely a lie. Every new drug developed over the past decade was funded by U.S. taxpayers. The revolutionary mRNA technology that pharma is so worried about monopolizing now was developed by university researchers and scientists at the NIH and the Department of Defense. Now, I know we've got a complicated love-hate relationship with billionaires in this country, but maybe, just maybe, it is not such a great idea to outsource global public health policy to a rapacious monopolist. Maybe, just maybe, it's not such a great idea to outsource labor market conditions and unionization rates to another rapacious monopolist at Amazon. Maybe we shouldn't be outsourcing free speech and censorship to another set of monopolists in Silicon Valley. Perhaps these men are good people. Maybe they're not good people. Maybe they're well-intentioned. Maybe they're not. But no one voted for them to be king of the world. They are totally unaccountable to a single soul. And every one of them is committed to existing power because they are existing power.
Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines. Help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear our masks and we'll have to stay distant. We'll wash our hands and we'll be more resistant. Fauci, yes? Promise us, please. We'll have a cure that can fight off this disease. Restrictions will lift with some ease. Dr. Fauci, don't forget me.
Warning. I chain smoke and I say fuck the law. When I accept myself for the way I am, I accept you too.
Thank you.
You were discretion advised.
There are three people I place in what Frank Ruscetti calls the unholy trinity of science, and they are Harold Varmus, Francis Collins, and Tony Fauci. Whenever you ask yourself why the truth hasn't been told in a critical area of public health, you'll probably find the fingerprints of these men at the crime scene.
You've been at the NIH a pretty long time, and it seems to me that during your tenure, our ability to control infectious diseases hasn't improved, but in fact, worsened. And even basic health tips such as you can't use antibiotics to treat viral infections has not been adequately communicated to the public because, for instance, people will come in demanding an antibiotic for a common cold, or any other viral infection, which has certainly served to create more resistant strains. Not saying that this has anything to do with this particular SARS epidemic, but don't you think it's time that you step down and let someone else who has a more effective message?
Actually, no.
Attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science, because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. That is what's going on. Science and the truth are being attacked.
We're talking about probably the most horrible scandal and scam ever perpetrated, not only in the name of science, but in humanity and in all history. Today is December 7th, and I was 12 years old when the attack on Pearl Harbor came, and I remember World War II very well. And it's a very significant day today because I see an incredible parallel between what is going on in the so-called AIDS epidemic and what happened in the years preceding and resulting in World War II. The great lie of Hitler. It's amazing. I think he would envy the job being done by members of the National Institutes of Health and even the media, especially in this country. And I will put the lie to the individuals of the NIH, particularly Gallo and Fauci and Hazeltine and Essex, and the rest of these scoundrels of the worst order. Criminals guilty of genocide, without a doubt. I invite them to take me to court. I wish Burroughs Wellcome would take me to court, because they have been putting out a killer drug knowingly. Because in a court of law, I would have the opportunity to provide the absolute proof and evidence.
Guys like Fauci get up there and start talking, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and he should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on the bottom. Those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to, and they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera.
From Spin Magazine, July 1994, Volume 10, Issue 4. With Beck on the front cover. When ABC's Nightline approached Mullis about participating in a documentary on himself, he instead urged them to focus their attention on the HIV debate. Quote, "That's a much more important story," he told producers, who up to that point had never acknowledged the controversy. In the end, Nightline ran a two-part series, the first on Kary Mullis, the second on the HIV debate. Mullis was hired by ABC for a 2-week period to act as their scientific consultant and direct them to sources. Quote, "What ABC needs to do," says Mullis, "is talk to Chairman of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Robert Gallo, one of the discoverers of HIV, and show that they're assholes, which I could do in 10 minutes. But I'd point out Gallo would just refuse to discuss the HIV debate, just as he's always done, Quote, I know he will, Mullis shoots back, anger rising in his voice. But you know what? I would be willing to chase the little bastard from his car to his office and say, this is Kary Mullis trying to ask you a goddamn simple question, and let the cameras follow. If people think I'm a crazy person, that's okay. But here's a Nobel Prize winner trying to ask a simple question from those who spent $22 billion and killed 100,000 people. It has to be on TV. It's a visual thing. I'm not unwilling to do something like that. He pauses, then continues, quote, and I don't care about making an ass of myself because most people realize I am one. Referring to the guardians of the HIV establishment, such as Gallo and Fauci, Mullis suddenly turns from rage to pity. Quote, I feel sorry for him, he admits. Quote, I want to have the story unveiled, but you know what? I'm just not the kick him in the balls kind of guy. I'm a moral person, but I'm not a crusader. I think it's a terrible tragedy that it's happened. There are some terrible motivations of humans involved in this, and Gallo and Fauci have got to be some of the worst. Then anger strikes in again. Quote, personally, I want to see those fuckers pay for a little bit. I want to see them lose their position. I want to see their goddamn children have to go to junior college. I mean, who do we care about? Do we care about these people that are HIV positive, whose lives have been ruined? Those are the people I'm most concerned about. Every night I think about this. I think, what is my interest in this? Why do I care? I don't know anybody dying of it. They're right about that. Well, except one of my girlfriend's brothers died of it, and I think he died of AZT.
Okay, who do we trust? Fauci? Fauci doesn't know enough to, if Fauci wants to get on television with somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff and debate him, he could easily do it because he's been asked. I mean, I've had a lot of people, president of the University of South Carolina asked Fauci if he'd come down there and debate me on the stage in front of the student body because I wanted somebody who was from the other side to come down there and balance because I felt like, well, these guys can listen to me, but I need to have somebody else down here that's going to tell me the other side. But Fauci didn't want to do it.
When I was looking at this data with our team the other night, it was reminiscent of 34 years ago in 1986 when we were struggling for drugs for HIV, and we had nothing. And there was a lot of anecdotal reports about things that maybe they worked, maybe not. People were taking different kinds of drugs. And we did the first randomized placebo-controlled trial with AZT, which turned out to give an effect that was modest.
In 1987, the war on AIDS took another drastic turn for the worse. AZT, a toxic chemotherapy deemed too poisonous for cancer treatment, was approved to treat symptomatic and asymptomatic HIV patients in an attempt to kill the virus that causes AIDS. AZT is a DNA chain terminator, a poison designed to randomly destroy the DNA synthesis of reproducing cells. It was initially developed to treat leukemia victims, but after animal testing, the FDA determined that it was too toxic for use in human beings and banned it. But in 1987, when the AIDS scare hit its height, the FDA was pressured into approving the drug for use for the first time in human beings, even for people who were healthy and showed no sign of AIDS. AZT is highly mutagenic, meaning that it destroys the genes in cells and has been shown to cause cancer in rodents. It targets the bone marrow, where B lymphocyte blood cells are being made. These are the very cells an AIDS patient needs most for immunity. AZT destroys randomly bone marrow, kidneys, liver, intestines, muscle tissue, the brain, and central nervous system. Peter Duesberg claims AZT actually causes AIDS itself.
AZT does directly causing AIDS-defining diseases. AIDS is a lot of things, but it doesn't cause Kaposi sarcoma or anything, but it does cause immunodeficiency. It was designed to do that. It was designed to kill human cells. In fact, the manufacturer says that specifically that it can cause AIDS-like diseases. And the manufacturer, that is Spirits Wellcome, says it is often difficult to distinguish adverse events possibly associated with pseudovidin or pseudovidin administration, which is AZT, from underlying signs of HIV disease. In other words, even they acknowledge, not just Duesberg, that AZT causes AIDS or AIDS-defining diseases.
The treatment causes a very similar condition we would expect from an AIDS patient. That's why nobody noticed that there was something wrong with the treatment.
I remember in 1992, after I first tested positive, I became involved in an organization called Women at Risk. There were 11 of us at the time on the board and involved in the group. All of us except 3 were on the medications. In the year and a half that I was involved with Women at Risk, every single woman in that organization on the drugs died. Every single one, except the 3 of us who weren't taking them.
The Wellcome Foundation, UK manufacturer of AZT, saw its shares spiral upwards. AZT was to be the new wonder drug. Then, in 1989, after further trials were terminated early in the United States because results looked promising, it was announced that AZT could be used not only on people with AIDS diseases, but in a much larger group, with HIV and low immune cell counts, but no other symptoms. Wellcome's shares soared to new heights, adding £1.4 billion to the company's UK stock market value in one day. The results of the early AZT trial on people with full-blown AIDS appeared to be so convincing that the drug was given a new fast-track approval by the United States Food and Drug Administration before any long-term toxicity trials in animals had been completed.
These new regulations specifically will have special criteria that would apply to immediately life-threatening conditions, recognizing that such patients are willing to accept the greater risk than that which normally would be the case.
From Spin Magazine, September 1995, Volume 11, Issue 6, with Neil Young on the cover. In early May, protesters from ACT UP San Francisco made their way through a back door and into a hall where some 700 people were dining at an AIDS fundraiser. The event was a benefit for the AIDS organization Project Inform. The invited speakers included ACT UP founder Larry Kramer and Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Activism and government were sitting down under one roof with common goals. 30 protesters fanned out in front of the room. Quote, "Tony Fauci, you killed our friends. This is where the murder ends." The chant wasn't making the usual accusation that Fauci's bureaucratic management had cost lives. This was about the star AIDS drug that Fauci had promoted against all reason, AZT. Party crashers blew whistles and flung their flyers, accusing Fauci of being a murderer, liar, and drug company pimp. Quote, "This has been festering for a long time," says Bella Fontaine. "I know I'm not speaking for every HIV positive person, but I feel that for Larry Kramer, Martin Delaney, and Tony Fauci, the leading AZT cheerleader, to sit down at a love fest in San Francisco is just intolerable. When our leaders start making friends with the people that are murdering us, then where does that leave us? It leaves us looking for another set of leaders." Michael Bellefontaine. Everyone relies on Larry Kramer for validity, but I think they've been able to co-opt him. AIDS activism took a nosedive when Larry Kramer stopped calling Anthony Fauci a murderer and started calling him Tony.
Just simply being infected with HIV is not going to do it. You need certain cofactors.
Cofactors are not necessary.
Dr. Fauci will say HIV causes AIDS without the need for anything else. That's kind of ridiculous.
The data that indicate that any different type of infection like mycoplasma or something like that is a necessary cofactor, I believe those theories have been debunked.
What the fuck does he mean? Sorry. What's it in what does he mean that there are no cofactors? Where's he coming from? There's cofactors for everything.
At the San Francisco International AIDS Conference in 1990, Dr. Luc Montagnier, who discovered the virus originally 6 months before Gallo's claim, made a startling statement. HIV might be harmless. Against his own interest, Montagnier's statement should have been earth-shaking. But the conventioneers paid it little attention and went right on talking about new antiviral drug treatments. Why is the scientific community ignoring the dangerous ramifications of this essential question about the cause of AIDS? Do we have an answer?
Yes, in retrospect, we certainly do. Too many people are making too much money out of it.
Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines. Help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear a mask Yes, promise us, please. We'll have a cure that can fight off this disease. Restrictions will lift with some ease. Dr. Fauci, don't forget me. Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines. Help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear our mask and we'll have to stay distant. We'll wash our hands and we'll be more resistant. Fauci, yes, promise us, please. We'll have a cure that can fight off this disease. Restrictions will lift with some ease. Dr. Fauci, don't forget me. Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines. Help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear our mask and we'll have to stay distant. We'll wash our hands and we'll be more resistant. Fauci, yes, promise us, please. We'll have a cure that can fight off this disease. Restrictions will lift with some